These brand new polls show one thing and one thing only. Kamala is done. You guys have got to check this out.
To defeat Kamala Harris in the next month's contest, and I'm going to show you just why he is the obvious favorite to win in this video. Never will the mainstream media inform you this. All they will do is point at some arbitrary state and declare Harris to have a 1 or 2 point advantage. Actually, against Joe Biden, Donald Trump is doing far better than he did in 2020. Against the vice president running a horrible campaign, the previous president's performance has been quite dominating. We will also review the 2024 electoral map based on polling today and contrast it with what the polls in 2020 indicated. And so on the map, I have left the 17 most contested races unfilled and filled in, already the rather solid blue and red states. Furthermore, obvious is a difference between the 2020 map and the 2024 one. Trump was suffering 4 years ago in areas including Alaska, South Carolina, and Missouri. 3 states he is on target to win by substantially more wider margins nowadays. Furthermore, battling in 2024 is Kamala Harris. She narrowly passes in states including Washington, New York, and New Jersey. States Biden did win in the last election by 15 points or more. If you wish another striking illustration, consider Florida, a state Trump now leads by 6%. 4 years ago, however, the polling indicated he would lose the state totally to Joe Biden by 0.9%. Returning to the map, we will begin our journey west, then gradually turn our direction east. Starting in Nevada, Trump currently lags Harris by 1.1%. Still, he trailed Biden by 2.4% 4 years ago. Nevada is thus not the finest illustration of a clear variation between 2020 and 2024 polling. But it most certainly shows the Democrats' improved situation 4 years ago compared to now. And given how close this race allegedly is, a 1% variation is really noteworthy. Nevada will thus be tilt blue on our 2024 map, while on our 2020 map it will only be lean blue. And thus, after this map is entirely filled in, you will truly be able to observe the increases in Trump's support from 2020 to now.
If you're telling me Trump has a lead on his 2020 self, oh my gosh, this election is wraps. Because in 2020, he outperforms his 2016 self in almost every metric until 4:30 in the morning. But if we can hone in on those mail-in ballots and make sure the same funny business does not happen again, this would be an absolute blowout. I'm talking Ronald Reagan proportions. But of course that won't happen because we need to actually get into the White House to regulate some of these laws and not be so lax on our voting, because it seems some people in Congress are okay with illegal immigrants voting or people without ID.
Next in Arizona. He also leads in practically every single poll published throughout the past month. And looking at the graph, his lead has just been widening for the last few weeks. In mid-August, Kamala Harris very narrowly gained a minor edge. She has lost that since then. She went quite rapidly, and Trump has been ahead ever since his lead has been progressively increasing. He will definitely bring Arizona victory come November. That will thus be a tilt-red state. Still, the polls indicated Biden would win Arizona by almost 1%. He was 0.9 ahead. And so, on our 2020 map, Colorado and New Mexico will be tilt blue. Our merely lack too much data. You will so have to take anything I say with a grain of salt today. Based on the one survey, Colorado is en route to go to Harris by 11 points, presenting now as a Democratic pollster. Clearly, it is exaggerating support for the vice president, but for now we just have this data to deal with. Biden was expected to triumph in Colorado by 9.5%. He won it finally by little over 13. Biden truly exceeded polling in one of the very few instances where this is true. Still, these are simply 2 surveys taken over a month before the election. You will so have to consider anything I say with great grain of salt, like I mentioned earlier. Though not as much data, we have a similar narrative in New Mexico. Harris leads by 8.5% according to 2024 polls. However, Biden was leading by 13 4 years ago, and thus Harris, from where Biden was 4 years ago, experiences a significant decline. Still, both Colorado and New Mexico will most likely show as blue states on our maps. Polling today and polling 4 years ago will reveal a clear difference in Texas nevertheless. Polls taken today reveal Trump winning by 5.2%. He's going to win the Lone Star State for a 3rd time quite effortlessly. Back in 2020, however, the polls predicted him winning by just 1.3%, hence this was not the case. Actually, throughout most of the election cycle, Texas was essentially a draw. There was statistically no edge among the contenders. Many felt Joe Biden really had a shot here. He lost Texas finally by almost 6 points. Actually, Joe Biden was not going to win the state. But given the polling, you would have expected Texas to be among the most competitive. And thus, given Texas was only a lean red state in 2020, this is one of those excellent models of the polling being considerably more favorable for Trump this time around than previous. Texas nowadays will be lean for the GOP. Moving up to the Midwest, this will be a somewhat divisive area as well, particularly with regard to the contests in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. But we'll start in Minnesota, where Kamala Harris leads with 4.7%. This is normal. She most likely will win Minnesota, but it will be closer than what the polls indicate. Joe Biden was en route to win the state by 4.3% in 2020. Actually, he won it by 7.2%. This is among those few previous instances in which Biden exceeded polling projections. Kamala Harris is running with Minnesota's literal governor, hence one would expect her to be performing better. And so on both of our maps, Minnesota will be lean blue, but Kamala Harris is not performing as she ought to be. Turning now to Iowa, current polls show Trump leading by 4%. Though obviously Trump will win the state by at least double that margin, the state will be lean red. Still, Iowa was also quite competitive 4 years ago. The polls showed him leading barely 2 points. Ultimately, though, he won the state 4 times that margin. Actually, Joe Biden was the state's preferred choice for most of October.
Almost every single state that he's mentioned that Trump had a lead in the polls in 2020, whether it be 1 point, 2 point, 3 points, it just seems that he won by double or triple that in almost every single instance, just going to show that the polls are nonsense. They are skewed heavily towards the Democrats because they don't take into effect the unsilent majority, the reticent voter. There are millions of Americans right now who support Donald Trump, but they wouldn't publicly say it because of the backlash that would ensue, and they know that. So even though the polls are looking favorable for Trump right now, I reckon he's doing even better.
Yes, the polling essentially overstated Democratic support here, and many of its Midwestern neighbors will follow suit in terms of trend. The Rust Belt is where the polling most often gets it wrong. Sadly for Kamala Harris, if she is to reach the White House, she has to win the states in the upper Rust Belt. Kamala Harris cannot lose this, either up in Wisconsin, a state she is visiting. The election is over should Wisconsin turn red. And my very strong belief is that Trump will be able to reclaim Wisconsin. For him, the polling is quite excellent. He trails by just 0.8%. You might glance at this and wonder, given Trump's non-leading poll results, why I believe he will win. Simply look at 2020, really. Joe Biden guided with a 6.7%. Numerous surveys saw him leading by double-digit margins. For Joe Biden, Wisconsin essentially was a lock. And this was the persistent truth for the whole 2020 election campaign. 4 years ago, this was reality. In Wisconsin, Joe Biden was going to rule. Still, he won the state by 0.63% at last. Indeed, Joe Biden's edge in Wisconsin was less than Trump's margin versus Clinton from 2016. And therefore today, polls from Wisconsin have Kamala Harris on target with a tilt margin. Still, 4 years ago, Biden was winning by narrow margin. It was quite near to surpassing the 7-point cutoff to even be a plausible state. Similar tales abound in neighboring Michigan. Joe Biden narrowly won the state by 2.8%. He was expected to win by 4.2%. Looking at this, you could claim that it's not all that horrible. But if you look at how the polling average moved in that last week, Biden led by 9 points based on October 26. But 1 week later, on November 3rd, the day the election was conducted, Trump had surged up to merely be behind by 4.2%. Actually, on the day of the election, Trump's polling average was not terrible. But only a few days prior, he was on almost double-digit winning trajectory for the state. And for practically the whole year 2020, the polling indeed did overestimate Democrats. Kamala Harris leads by 0.7% right now, 2024. That she's winning is fantastic. One could make such a case. Kamala Harris is not, however, performing anything near to what Biden did 4 years ago. She won not the state if she is winning by just 0.7% based on poll results, which usually have a lefty inclination. Michigan will thus show on our map as tilt blue. Like Wisconsin, though, I firmly believe that Trump will turn the Wolverine state back as well next month. Then on our 2020 map, Michigan was a lean blue state with the last polling average. But at several times, even only days before that, it was most certainly. Another clear difference between polling and reality from 2020 in Ohio is Biden was predicted to lose the state by barely 1%. He lost it ultimately by more than 8 times that margin. Actually, throughout most of the election, Joe Biden was Ohio's preferred choice. Ultimately, he was totally destroyed. Trump indeed leads by 8% in 2024. Given exactly how unreliable polls have been here in the past, he most likely will be able to win the Buckeye State by 10% or more. And thus on our 2024 map, Ohio is clearly going to be probably red. But like Iowa and Texas, which, as we all know, the former president won very effortlessly, in 2020 it was merely a tilt-red state in favor of Trump. After that, Pennsylvania ranks as the most significant state on the map. Whoever gains the Keystone State is probably going to win the election straightforwardly. Looking at 2020 polling then, it was rather accurate. Biden's margin position on the final polling average was exactly on. But return only 1 month to October of 2020, from which we are referring now regarding the 2024 cycle. And Biden led by 7% points. Originally expected to be a lean blue state, Trump surged in the last weeks. Should he repeat that against Kamala Harris, he will lead with great authority. Harris right now is not leading by 7 points. She is not even leading, in fact. Right here it states a tie. Looking at the actual RCP map, however, you will find Trump has a very marginal advantage. However, it is quite fine depending on exactly how much he has been undervalued in the past. On his map today, Pennsylvania is tilled red for Trump. Still, 4 years ago it was tilled for Biden. Then, just a few weeks before the election, it was most certainly blue. Much like both Michigan and Wisconsin, practically until 1 week before Election Day. In the Northeast, we have Maine and New Hampshire, 2 states that hardly will be very significant. Kamala Harris is most likely the favorite. Harris rules in New Hampshire at 7.4%. It'll probably be blue today. Joe Biden ahead by 10% in 2020. He was performing better, hence it is still likely for the Democrats. Then up in Maine, today's poll shows the vice president at 11.7. Still, the University of New Hampshire is arguably the worst pollster available. You thus truly cannot treat these figures very seriously. For Harris, Maine will also be probably present. Then in 2020, Biden was ahead by almost 12 points as well. Actually not that different at all. Another most probable blue state. In Virginia we do, however, observe a far more striking difference. In 2020, state Biden was on target to win by 11 points. Kamala Harris leads today with only 6.4, essentially half of that margin. And this is not shocking either. Virginia has been turning rightward. Harris most likely to win the state on a slim margin. It most likely to be cited by less than 5%. Should Trump explode in the last surveys, like he has done in Michigan and Pennsylvania in past years, he might even have a shot at winning. Trump would most likely be en route to win the state if Joe Biden hadn't stepped out, since he really led in Virginia's polling average versus Joe Biden prior to Biden leaving the race. And hence Virginia will be lean blue depending on current figures. But in 2020, Biden was clearly headed toward a double-digit margin of victory, quite definitely. Next on North Carolina is another story of Democrats breaking out just before the election. Looking at the polling, indeed, it was rather accurate. Trump led by 0.2% in the poll average. He gained 1.3% the state. But simply go back a few days, even a few weeks before the election, Biden was leading by 2% to 3% at this stage in the cycle 4 years ago.
My prediction is that North Carolina and Pennsylvania are going to be the 2 most consequential states. I believe if Trump could take those 2, I think he's got 270 locked up. The thing that's concerning me is after the hurricane that just happened like last week, they're starting to change the voter laws in North Carolina, basically making it easier for those affected by the hurricane to vote. Now, call me a conspiracy theorist all you want, but I want as much voter regulation as possible. I don't want these to be very lax conditions. There's a lot at stake right now, and I don't think we should be doing this because this reminds me a lot of 2020 and the mail-in ballots and all of that nonsense. So I got a bad feeling in my gut about North Carolina.
6%. And so on both of our maps, the Tar Heel state will be tilted red. 4 years ago, of course, North Carolina was still a lean blue state at this stage. Therefore, there is still obvious difference between Trump's performance today and his performance versus Biden. We had another one of those extremely uncommon states in Georgia where Democratic support was undervalued. Biden took Georgia by 0.3 in 2020. According to polls, Trump would prevail by 1%. Hence, it was rather erroneous in comparison to many others. But today, Trump commands 1.5%. He is guiding with a wider margin than in past times. And once more, Georgia did not become a red state based on polls until very last, unlike many of its neighbors. Actually, Joe Biden led rather quite a bit much of October, right before the election. Georgia will thus be tilt red on both of our maps. Once more, though, Trump is already in a dominant posture, unlike years past, where he only led right at the very end. Finally, in Florida, as we have seen before, 2024 polls show Trump winning by 6%. In the Sunshine State, he is going to rule. He is definitely going to win it. Then in 2020, the polls genuinely showed Biden ahead. By barely under 1%, he was on target to win the state. Florida will thus show on our 2020 map as tilt blue. And so with both maps filled properly, you can now contrast the 2024 to 2020 variants. Based on data from 4 years ago, Trump was not going to win many of the states he is currently on target to win. Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. Actually, Florida is a blue state in 2020.
It seems like Donald Trump is right on track for the White House. But the thing is, we cannot be complacent. We cannot just sit around and say he's got this in the bag. We need to put our foot on the gas pedal. If we do not win this time, I do not believe we will ever see a free and fair election again. I think a lot of freedoms are going to start to get infringed. And just by importing all these migrants into the swing states, that tells you everything you need to know about this candidate. Like, does anyone actually believe that all these Haitian migrants going into Ohio, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, you think it's a coincidence that she's targeting these swing states? So what I'm asking y'all to do is just get out there and vote. I don't care if you're in the most Democratic state or the most Republican state. Just get out there and vote. Show support any way you can, because I believe we need all hands on deck. And there's almost always an October surprise. So we gotta be on the lookout for that. But I'm just asking you, get out there, vote, do the right things. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on this down below. Let me know, what states do you think Donald Trump needs to hold in order for him to get 270, no problem? What swing states? Pennsylvania, Georgia? Let me know. I'd love to hear that. And if you enjoyed, make sure to smash that like, comment, subscribe, and wish you guys nothing but the best. Till next time.